It is Awesemo MMA Live Before Lock. I haven't done one of these with my buddy here, Pete the Heat Rogers, but I was kind of thinking, should I just introduce myself as Jason Floyd and see how long would it take people to point out that that's not the case? But Pete, what's going on, man?
Oh, what's up, brother? How are you? Thanks for joining us today, guys. Excited about this card. It's been a MMA filled weekend between all the cards, between PFL, Bellator, and now finally the UFC. So, we want to hear your questions and want to help you guys out for this slate.
Yeah, so since obviously Jason isn't here, it's going to be me. If you guys have questions in the Slack chat, at me, we'll be answering those. You guys have questions in the YouTube chat, fire some of those in. We'll be getting to, as much as we can and talking through some fights. And don't go anywhere after we're done. We've got NFL preseason Live Before Lock after this. So all kinds of stuff on the Awesemo YouTube channel. All the more reason you should be liking all our videos. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Just today, we've had MMA, now we've had NASCAR, MLB, NFL preseason later. And I hope you guys like me, because if you don't, this has been a brutal day for you to sit and watch on the YouTube channel, because I've been doing a little bit of everything. But let's jump in and just start with the main event, because it's a fight that I actually have a little bit of a lean on. Kelvin Gastelum versus Jared Cannonier. One of the only fights I bet outright. I did bet Gastelum as an underdog. My main reasoning here is that if you look at the output, fairly similar striking stats, but Cannonier traditionally has relied on finishes to get wins. He's obviously not going to end up submitting Gastelum in this spot, and we've never seen Gastelum knocked out on the feet. So Cannonier, who's typically a somewhat early finisher bust type fighter, it's hard for me to see him finishing Gastelum when it's never happened before.
Yeah, I mean, same for me, right? Like I like Kelvin Gastelum. Obviously, like when we see him struggle on the scale, it's a little concerning, but I think it's more about his like consistent struggles with whether it's his diet or just mismanagement of weight. I feel like he's constantly been trying to figure that out throughout his career, even coming back from the Ultimate Fighter. But I will say that at his price range, and we always want to find these fighters that have a wrestling path to victory, he can, mix in some takedowns and really start to solidify some rounds if rounds get close. And for me, in a 5-round fight, with all the experience that Kelvin Gastelum has had, I lean his direction. And the wrestling's kind of just like the tipping point for me. I'm like, okay, I'm going to pick the more well-rounded fighter in this matchup. And I do like Kelvin Gastelum. I think Cannonier's a solid fighter for the division. It's hard for me to see him outclassing Gastelum for 5 rounds.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at some of the metrics here, decent takedown defense for Cannonier at 64%, but we have seen him taken down and controlled on the ground at some point in some of his fights. So Kelvin Gastelum, I kind of feel like that's the underrated aspect of his game that could really play into this fight, is his ability to land takedowns. We saw most recently against Ian Heinisch. It was a spot where it was kind of a crossroads fight for me with Gastelum, where it was like, I don't know if he's coming. I don't know if he's going. He had the great fight against Adesanya, but then a fight against Darren Till, basically nothing happened. Then he had the fight against Hermanson, where, he got finished on the ground fairly quickly. And I didn't know what to make of him going into the Heinisch fight. He ended up landing 6 takedowns in that fight. And that's something that I think could be really important for him in this matchup against Cannonier, particularly if Cannonier does end up hurting him on the feet. I think Gastelum is capable of getting this to the ground. So in terms of my ownership in DFS right now, I'm overweight to the field on Gastelum. I'm underweight to Cannonier. Is that about how you're approaching it also?
Yeah, exactly. It's not like I'm feeling like extremely confident in rostering Gastelum or Cannonier in this matchup. I feel like there's some better fighters, but given the price point, it's Gastelum for me. It's like a 60% lean. I really like him. I'm okay with getting different and getting away from Cannonier. If you really feel like he can touch up Gastelum on the feet, I think that a Cannonier backing can be somewhat contrarian, because I feel like Gastelum is going to carry some hefty ownership today.
Yeah, and I still think Cannonier, obviously, it's a main event. He has a lot of power. And just because we've never seen Kelvin Gastelum finish doesn't mean it's impossible. I would just probably flip the odds if I was the one personally making a line. It's not that I think that Gastelum should be a minus 200 favorite or anything like that. But depending what book you look at, he's a plus 125 underdog. If you guys go over to oddshopper.awesemo.com, you can compare the lines at the different books that are legal in your area. And I just think it's good value on Gastelum. If I was making the line, I'd probably set him as like a minus 150 favorite. So Cannonier going to be in my player pool. But to me, I just think the line's a little off here. I lean towards Gastelum for DFS purposes. But Cannonier, I guess the question is, even if we're both going to be underweight to him, how much of a priority is he for you in tournaments?
In tournaments, I'm okay with getting to him, right? I mean, we always talk about how prioritizing main event and co-main event underdogs, but I feel like it shouldn't be just worded as underdogs. It should be the lower owned fighters within those fights. Like, Cannonier has all the skills to pull this off tonight. I think if I'm doing a 20 max, I'll probably want to get to maybe a quarter of him, if that. Like I really have a decent lean towards Gastelum today. But I mean, you have to realize the skill level of these guys in the main event and co-main event. They're there for a reason. So nothing surprises me in this game, Greg. So I mean, the Cannonier goes out there and knocks out Gastelum. I'm like, wow, we didn't see that coming. Gastelum has taken a ton of damage throughout his career, and maybe a guy like Cannonier, who's fought at higher weight classes, can possibly expose him there.
Yeah, that's one. Cannonier's fought at heavyweight before.
Yeah.
Gastelum should probably be fighting he should be fighting at 15 pounds less. Yes. It's kind of crazy. Like I think potentially Kelvin Gastelum could even make lightweight if he was to really get his diet in check. But that's one thing that is a little concerning to me, is power and size difference. But still, we've never seen Gastelum hurt before, so I don't think it is the most likely outcome. But by the way, people are really stirring it up with you in the YouTube chat here.
It's a weekly thing. I love it. It's a weekly thing.
Everybody thinks they can submit Pete. Everybody thinks they can knock him out. There's only one person, by the way, in this YouTube chat, in this company, anybody associated with us, who's beating Pete, and that's Alex Baker. If you guys have been on Twitter, you know about this man's, his street fighting accolades. This is a guy who, he's undefeated on the streets, and his opponent, he doesn't let them tap. There's no referee to knock him out. He fights to the death on the street. So if I'm going power rankings in terms of combat abilities, it's Alex 1, Pete 2. I have a little bit of fighting experience. I would go 3. It's mostly high school stuff, because I used to in high school, me and my friends, we would put on fight cards in the basement, and we would drink, and then we'd all bet on each other's fights and stuff like that. So yeah,
a little reckless Friday night fights type of stuff. It's great. We got some awesome listeners in there. I guess the submission of the week that I'm getting submitted by is a Kimura. I'm okay with that. And I'm okay with the power rankings of having Alex Baker ahead of me. I'm not upset by that at all.
Yeah, and I mean, not to get too far off track here, but there was somebody in the UFC who did go to my high school, and at one of these fight cards that we had in my basement, he did not participate, but somebody did get drunk and threw up in his shoes. And maybe that's what inspired him to come for a fight. It's like, I don't want people throwing up in my shoes at high school party basements anymore. So
I love it.
Listen, I think I confidently put myself 3 on the power list, pound for pound, though, because I'm going to be outsized by a lot of guys at the company. But listen, that aside, Alex has to be number 1, but nobody in the YouTube chat is beating Pete in a fight. But let's go through some of these other fights. And if we look at the high end of the pricing range today, it's a weird card, because I think there's a lot of these guys at the upper end of the pricing range that have upside, but I'm not confident in any of these guys. So let's say 9K and above on DraftKings. We have Brian Kelleher, we have Mark Madsen, Chase Sherman, and William Knight. Of those 4, which is your favorite DFS option?
I have to go with the grappler and the Olympian and Mark Madsen. I understand that Clay Guida is a fantastic, fighter within the company and has fought literally everybody within the division, but Father Time's undefeated. And, I don't feel like he's the same fighter he used to be. He's still very talented, and he's able to win certain fights and certain matchups for sure. But you're talking about an Olympian crossing over. Outside of having a cardio issue, I really just think that Marco Madsen really just wipes the floor with him here, possibly takes him to Takedown City. Clay Guida is usually able to compete in fights where he can mix in his wrestling. He tries that today against Marco Madsen. He might get, dropped on his head. I like him at 9,100 quite a bit. And, I look at William Knight and Chase Sherman as somewhat volatile options where I just don't feel like I can have so much trust in them. I would much rather get to Brian Kelleher, who's a solid wrestler, has KO power. We've seen Domingo Parlate get knocked out in the past, but also Kelleher is a strong wrestler as well. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Kelleher mix in takedowns and just win a dominant decision. Like I'm okay with that. So I would honestly prefer the 9,100, 9,000 fighters and prefer the savings a little bit rather than reaching at the top.
Yeah. And by the way, I have to address this super chat here, which is from our sweet Lou K&N. He wants to know, which UFC fighter did I almost wrestle in my basement, but puked in his shoes and said. So let's get the record straight first. I was not the one who couldn't hold my liquor and threw up in somebody's shoes. That was somebody else who I went to high school with. The fighter, I'm not sure if I should say who it is, but I mean, I don't, if people may be able to put 2 and 2 together anyway. I went to high school with Mickey Gall, and that's who the fighter is. But no, I was not scheduled for a fight against Mickey Gall. He did not participate, but he was just at my house for a party. Then I believe it was his shoes that got thrown up in, and I think that might have inspired him to become a UFC fighter. Who's to say? But that's the narrative that I'm going with here. I want to touch on the Mark Madsen versus Clay Guida, because I have two bets right now on today's fights. One of them I already gave out. That was Kelvin Gastelum, just the straight money line. The other one is I have Mark Madsen to win by submission in the first round. I have it at 24-1, and then the first round 16-1, second round at 24-1. And here's the main reason why. We know that the path to victory for Mark Madsen in this fight is on the ground. If this plays out on the feet, he probably ends up losing to Clay Guida, because what we've seen of Mark Madsen striking, it's not all that great. Clay Guida, I think, could have an advantage there. But on the ground, which is where I think Madsen's going to look to take this fight, Clay Guida, we've seen him submitted a whole bunch of times. So his pro record, 36-20. That's a whole bunch of professional fights. Of those 20 losses, 10 have come via submission. Mark Madsen, we know that he's somebody who great grappling pedigree. Sometimes I think we've seen him get a little weary towards the end of fights, like the fight against Austin Hubbard, for example. He kind of wore down in the third round. So I think if he does submit Guida, it would probably come in the first or second round. But do you think that's a reasonable path to victory for him?
I do think it's a reasonable path to victory because of what Clay Guida's been throughout his career. You have to really take him out of the fight because he's always going to be in your face and trying to compete. So you have to put him unconscious or attempt to. So that's why he gets caught and choked so much. And, and a few times he's been knocked out because you really just have to put him unconscious. I will say that, when I was out in New Mexico and Clay Guida was matched up against Anthony Pettis, at that time, I don't think there was anybody that thought that Clay Guida was going to go in there and pull off the victory, but he has a strong wrestling background. But in the training room, he's caught in submissions constantly. And it's something that he struggled throughout. I know that being a part of Team Alpha Male, he's going to probably have good guillotine defense. But a guy like Marco Madsen, I think that some ground and pound and some top position can open up some positions, especially if you get desperate, your neck is left out there. I think that those odds are completely fair. And I would definitely capitalize and try to target him like you did. In addition to that, though, I mean, I don't mind targeting like Marco Madsen inside the distance. On top, if he could possibly just put Guida in a really, really bad spot, hit him with some ground and pound, some unanswered strikes, we could see him walking away with a TKO as well.
Yeah, and I'm a little concerned that that's a possibility just because we've seen him win fights that way before Madsen, and then also that I do think he should be able to get a decent amount of top control time against Guida should this fight go his way. Amongst the cheap options, Guida is somebody who I don't have exposure to right now, but is he somebody that you looked at for value at all?
Not really. And, I mentioned it before is because like in the fights where he's excelled, it's where he has the wrestling advantage. He's not going to have that here. What he's going to have is probably a cardio advantage. So he needs to capitalize late if Marco Madsen really just expends too much energy. So it's a lot to really bank on at that price point. If he wins, it's probably by squeaking out a decision. I would much rather target some other 7,000 fighters that I think have legitimate chances of winning inside the distance and also have strong odds towards walking away with a victory and pulling off the upset. So I'm okay with getting away from Clay Guida today. I think that he's going to be decently popular for people that don't really know MMA or kind of just, plugging in names, because if you look at the box score, you've seen that he's fought so much within the octagon, 36-17 listed on DraftKings, 36-20 on Tapology, 66.7 points per fight. I think he's going to be decently popular in hopes that he can pull off the upset, but I just don't see it happening today.
Yeah, we have, if you look at our current ownership projections, he is projected for right around 20% ownership. So it does look like there's a pretty good chance that Guida is going to be somewhat popular. And I think a lot of people are looking at him for safety too, because if you're looking at some of these high-end fighters to target, this is the one that has the most likely odds of going the distance. So I think a lot of people are saying like, hey, if I'm looking to punt somebody, I don't think Guida's all that likely to get finished. I personally think that Guida's probably a little more likely to get finished by Madsen than the odds indicate, but just my own personal opinion. And, it's a fairly big fight card, certainly more fights than some of the other recent ones we've seen. So can't roster everybody. This is one of the guys who isn't making it into my player pool is Clay Guida. But you talked about some of these guys in the cheaper price range do you think are more likely to win than Guida? So I'm going to ask you this question. Mm-hmm. We went over these 9K guys and said, which one do you think is the best play? Which one do you think is the most likely to lose? So if you think Madsen's most likely to win, it's obviously not going to be him. But Kelleher, Madsen, Sherman, Knight, which one of those fighters is most likely to get upset and break a lot of lineups?
Well, I know both of the opponents for I know Fabio Charant and I do know Parker Porter, so I'll be rooting like crazy for him. But honestly, we've seen Chase Sherman struggle within the octagon at times from a volume, just getting out volumed at points and also not looking like his true self, or I don't even know what his true self is because he's popped for USADA before. It's tough to really get a beat on Chase Sherman, but a guy like Parker Porter who is a decently high volume striker for the division and is extremely tough. Yes, he's been wobbled and knocked out, but I think that a guy like Parker Porter could frustrate from the outside against a guy like Chase Sherman. So on paper, it looks like Sherman should walk right through Porter, but I'm telling you, man, Porter's a really, really tough fighter that could probably squeak out a decision.
Yeah, so for me, I totally agree with you. Parker Porter is somebody I'm targeting in the lower price range. I think this is a really high upside fight. If you just look at the striking metrics for these two guys, both of them land at a very high rate and also absorb damage at a very high rate. So Parker Porter, in the limited amount of time that we've seen him in the octagon, only 2 fights in the UFC, he lands 7.69 significant strikes per minute. He absorbed 7.36. Chase Sherman on the other side lands 6 significant strikes per minute, absorbs 5.77. We also know this is a heavyweight fight, pretty good chance of a finish. I'm going to be on both sides. I think that Porter's a good low-end target to go after, but I think this is one of the top overall fights to target on the card. Heavyweight fight, chance for a knockout, and then also just all the volume on both sides. So is this also one that you're going to be targeting pretty heavily?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, heavyweight's typically volatile, and it's a good fight to target for GPPs. Women's MMA is something to target on underdogs, and I also think in heavyweights, it takes one shot to really change the course of a fight. But in addition to that, we have high volume heavyweights. Like that's pretty odd and not really likely. So I like the chances of Porter pulling off the upset here. It's not an easy fight by any means, but I will definitely have exposure to him.
All right. We did get a question here in our premium Slack chat from Blackbird15. He's asking us, should he stack the main event for FanDuel cash? For me, the answer is no. And something else that's different about FanDuel versus DraftKings is that we don't get any kind of pricing discount for the main event. We get price increases for the main event on FanDuel. And this is also a fight that, I don't think it's guaranteed to be a super high scoring fight between Gastelum and Cannonier. So for me, especially with the pricing on FanDuel, it's not a fight that I would look to stack for cash games. But what say you?
Yeah, I would agree. For me, you're spending too much of your salary there. You would need Cannonier to defend a ton of takedowns, and then you'd also need both of these guys to outperform everybody else on the slate. I just feel like it's pretty, unlikely that that's going to occur. There's better spots over there on FanDuel. Target some fighters that are, facing some wrestlers that can stuff some takedowns and walk away with a victory. Stacking the main event this week does not make much sense.
All right. We've got some people now asking some questions about Charant, who's going to be fighting against William Knight. This is another tough one because William Knight, obviously physical specimen. If you just look at him and be like, if this was the old days where you just saw 2 people stand on a scale and you try to pick who to bet on, you go, that guy, you pick William Knight to pick to beat everybody in the world other than Alex Baker, right? You just look at this guy visually, just be like, he beats the crap out of most people. The real concern I have here with William Knight in this matchup is just after what we saw what happened to him in his last fight against Dan Jung, where he was taken down 8 times and basically just controlled for the entire fight. So William Knight is definitely somebody with a lot of upside in the high range, but I don't know what to make of him after we saw last fight. So you said you do have a little bit of knowledge of Fabio Charant, somebody who maybe trained with a little bit, but do you think he's capable of doing or executing that kind of game plan where maybe he is able to take down William Knight and hold him down?
100%. I do think that Fabio can possibly pull the upset here. It's not an easy fight by any means. I was talking to a few people that I know about this fight, and Fabio, this fight probably would have happened on the regional scene. Now these guys are just getting paid a lot more to go in there and perform. I will say that throughout William Knight's career, he's really put himself in some terrible positions in a lot of his fights. If you go back and watch, he's constantly having to overcome adversity and having to get up from the bottom and, losing a couple rounds to come back with a miraculous comeback. And you could only bail yourself out so many times, right? And I understand that there's levels to opponents, and his last opponent is an extremely, I would say, underrated fighter who was able to put him on his back and put him where he's uncomfortable. William Knight is a small frame guy, but he is a huge man. Like he's extremely strong, but his cardio has been suspect at times. Fabio needs to, fight the correct fight. So, in addition to Parker Porter, I will have exposure to Fabio Charant. And I think it's fair because on the feet, if he stays on the outside, what he did to capture the LFA title was he just, stick and move. And he was able to outpoint Myron Davis. And he looked good. And in addition to that, maybe his submission game will make William Knight a little hesitant about coming in and committing on takedowns. Because if you look, Fabio has some really good submissions, but if he hunts them too much, he gets put on his back and submitted by Alonzo Menefield. So it's where I feel like the pricing's wrong on this. William Knight shouldn't be as high as he is. He's aggressive. So if they were having salaries to match aggressiveness, he's probably number one on the entire slate with aggressiveness. But I think this should have been like 8,600. Fabio is more than capable of pulling this off. I'll be rooting like crazy for him. There are plenty of underdogs I don't want exposure to, but Fabio and Parker Porter are two of them that I do.
All right. And we do have a question here by the way, I agree with basically everything you said. For me, it's kind of hard to find all that much information on Charant. We've only seen him fight twice in the octagon. Once was on the Contender Series, and then his one UFC fight, that ended very quickly against Alonzo Menefield. He ended up getting Von Flue choke. So it's hard for me to say exactly what kind of game plan he would be able to execute here, but I'll take the information you just said, and I'm going to say I'll add a little bit of Charant to my portfolio and get a small bit of exposure to him. Not all that much. Now, got a guy in the YouTube chat who's taking a little bit of umbrage with us, Nate Lucier, and here he wants to know why we're not just giving out the locks who we're most confident in, and it's generally hard to do that for UFC, particularly for this slate where it's a slate that to me has a whole lot of variance. We don't even have that many guys that are like minus even 200 favorites. It's a lot of tightly lined fights, but I could say for DFS purposes, these are my most rostered fighters right now. Kelvin Gastelum, number one. I think the line's a little bit off there. Of the cheap fighters, he's the one that I feel I have the best chance of winning, in my opinion. And then on the high end, it's Brian Kelleher and Marco Madsen for me.
100%.
So for me, those are the three that relative to the price I feel best about.
100%. And I understand that two of those are 9,000 options, but it's good to target the 9,000 options that you have a ton of confidence in. And I think that Kelleher should win this fight. I've seen him perform at such a high level at times. I think that he walks right through a guy like Pilarte. And I think that Marco Madsen could be possibly, flying under the radar if people don't understand his accolades and his Olympian caliber and what he can do to Clay Guida in the wrestling department. So for me, if you want locks, it would be Kelleher and it would be Marco Madsen, but you'd have to find something within the mid-range or the low end to really start to fill out your lineups. And that's where a guy where Kelvin Gastelum, main event, 5 rounds to work with, tons of experience, wrestling in his back pocket. I think that he's the third option there.
All right. I'm going to say I agree with you because you were agreeing with what I had said before also, but is there anybody of those three that you look at on the slate as being a guy who you are pretty confident, whether as being somebody that you're very confident is going to win or just being a really strong GPP play outside of those three that is popping up in a meaningful amount of your lineups? Outside of those three,
it's always the 8,000, 8,200 fight, right? Like, we're always looking at that fight and it's a tilting one. And I struggle with it week to week, where I should have more exposure to the guy who actually walks away victorious. But for me, I like, Vince Pichel. We were speaking about this fight before the broadcast. And, Pichel has strong wrestling that can give Hubbard some problems. In addition to that, he's a solid striker too. So where Austin Hubbard really shines is on the feet, defending takedowns, punishing people. You have a guy in Vince Pichel who's extremely aggressive. Yes, he's been absent from the cage and somewhat inactive throughout his career. I think it's like an 8 or 9 year tenure for only 8 fights. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's like he averages like 1 a year, which is crazy. But at 8,200, it's a guy I want plenty of. I did a parlay between Marco Madsen, Brian Kelleher, and Vince Pichel, and then a couple fighters from PFL and Bellator. So I need these guys to come through for me. And I think that Vince Pichel, I think the odds are kind of, messing with me a little bit. I think it should be a little bit wider than they are.
Yeah, and this is something else that, because we did talk about this fight beforehand, and I was weighing whether I wanted to bet Vince Pichel or not. And I think I will once the show ends. But Austin Hubbard, this is the same fight he gets every single time in the UFC. Like, I don't know what the UFC matchmakers have against them, but they just it's like, all right, what grappler are we going to give Austin Hubbard next? And we see this matchup a lot. He fought against Joe Solecki. He got submitted in the first round. He fought against Max Roshkoff. And that was the fight where Roshkoff had a very strong first round, struggled in the second round, 10-8, got beat up on the feet, and then wasn't able to continue. And the fight was stopped while he was on the stool between the second and third round. He fought against Mark Madsen, gets taken down 8 times in that fight. So we've seen this a lot from Austin Hubbard. Overall, if you look at his takedown defense numbers, they're not that good. He has a 59% takedown defense, a 58% takedown defense. Considering that Vince Pichel lands 3.83 takedowns per 15 minutes, I think there's a really good chance that we see more of the same of these Austin Hubbard fights, where when he loses, he gets taken down, he gets controlled a lot on the ground. So at that price point, Vince Pichel, I think, is the highest upside fighter because of his grappling ability.
100%. And if you want like a contrarian leverage play, then I would say, just ignore the metrics and look Austin Hubbard's way. I have a hard time thinking that he's going to walk away victorious in this matchup. But anytime you have a fighter coming from elevation, if they're able to outpace or outwork their opponent, they really have an advantage in the cardio department. I didn't know, what elevation was or how it affected your cardio until I went out and I trained in New Mexico. And let me tell you, man, when I came back over here to Connecticut, New England, my cardio was insane. So they really have an advantage. So if you think that Vince Pichel is not going to be able to keep up a gas tank throughout 3 rounds, Austin Hubbard's definitely a leverage guy.
Yeah, and you know what people don't talk about enough, and this is an Alex Baker secret. You know where he trains? Underwater. So people talk about going to elevation. People talk about training. Nobody talks about underwater. I think that is the next advantage to really upping your cardio as you go out and you train underwater. That's really tough. That's tough business on the lungs. But we do have some more questions here in the premium Slack chat. First from Woody. He's saying he's going to ask a serious question. Some of his other comments less serious in the Slack chat. But thoughts on getting high exposure to Brahimaj? I think he's a high upside fighter. I have a decent amount of exposure to him in GPPs. I just wish he would grapple. I mean, we saw in his last UFC fight where he should have had a grappling advantage, but he just didn't shoot for takedowns. I'm going to pull up the stats really quickly because off the top of my head, I don't think he attempted a single takedown in that fight against Max Griffin. I just want to pull up the stats to make sure that was the case. He went 0 for 0 on takedowns, didn't attempt a takedown. And the end result of that fight is he got his ear elbowed off his face in the third round. So I think there's a lot of upside in Brahimaj. I just wish I knew for sure what his game plan was going into the fight, because if he's going to try to strike, he's most likely going to lose, and it's not going to look very pretty. If he goes to wrestle and grapple, I think he has a chance to potentially get a finish on the ground. He has a chance to rack up a lot of control time, put up a good DK score. So I ask you, how comfortable are you with rostering Brahimaj, and what kind of game plan do you think he'll have here?
Well, I mean, you saw how the first fight in his debut went, right? And I would imagine he comes from a very strong camp with a great coach. And that coach has sat him down numerous times. I said, I want you to watch this, and I want you to see what you could have done to walk away with the victory. And, instead of taking the left road, you chose the right. And that's not, in your best interest, especially when you're going up against good strikers. He wasn't credited with any takedowns because Max Griffin really controlled him in the clinch. And against the cage, he was fighting for underhooks, reversing position a lot. And it was a lot of, clinch fighting and just kind of like going back and forth. I will say that I think that Brahimaj will come in here much better. I ran into him when one of his guys was fighting at Mohegan Sun, and he's a big guy. I was surprised. I was like, man, he's a big guy. So he's definitely physically imposing, and I think that he could, really just get rid of Palatnikov quickly if he chooses the correct route. Palatnikov has a bad habit of turning his back when he's looking to get up from the mat, and whenever you do that against a strong submission guy like Brahimaj, you could be, getting, rear naked choke pretty quickly. So we saw Palatnikov make that mistake in his previous fight. And, I like Brahimaj, but I will say that Palatnikov showed in his debut that he can weather the storm, get out grappled, lose, the majority of the fight, come back, have the better motor, and expose people if they're not willing to go 15 minutes. So, I think this is a very, very tilting fight. I think that it's a volatile fight to target, as it always is each week. But, against Impa Kasanganay, he showed me some deficiencies in his grappling. So I'm okay with going to Brahimaj in this matchup. I think he makes some adjustments and walks away victorious.
Yeah, and if you look at the sports betting odds, the consensus line is somewhere like plus 170, plus 175 for him to win by submission. That's a pretty strong metric for somebody at this kind of money line. So it's also a thing where you look at Brahima and it's, we don't know what we're going to get out of him because he did not play to his strengths in his UFC debut. Who knows though? Maybe that was jitters. Max Griffin's also, that's a pretty tough opponent for a UFC debut. Palatnikov is a step down in competition. So, and also I don't really know what to make of Palatnikov either, because his first fight against Luis Kosi, he gets the crap beat out of him for the first round where Kosi just gasses. We had never seen Kosi fight beyond like 3 minutes in a fight before. We see him get out of the 3 minutes, and then he just didn't have anything left in the gas tank, and Palatnikov kind of won by default at that point. But he didn't look good in his last fight. If Brahima wins, I think it's most likely to come on the ground and by submission. So high upside GPP target, a lot of variance there. So once again, though, somebody that I'm targeting quite a bit in my player pool. We do have some more questions here in the Slack chat, so I'm going to answer these one by one. But our guy Blackbird15 checking in again. He's asking, who is a favorite MVP option for cash and tournaments for FanDuel?
It's a great question. Well, who could possibly be boosted over on that platform that we're not talking about? I mean, we want somebody with a crazy score. And I understand that they're not going to be defending takedowns, but they're going to be initiating a lot of it and possibly working towards a finish. I think Marco Madsen on every platform just makes a ton of sense today.
Certainly for cash games, because yes, for cash games and GPP, I'll start with for cash games. It's definitely Madsen for me, just from a standpoint of, number one, I feel pretty good about his chance to win. And in a win, based on his fight style, he should at a minimum score fairly well. I think other guys in this price range could be a little more likely to earn a finish, and guys like Brian Kelleher or William Knight. But in terms of the safety he brings, Madsen would be my favorite play for cash games as an MVP. I don't mind him for GPPs either as an MVP. But in terms of a favorite, well, that's really tough.
That's a really hard question, man.
I mean, my lean right now would be to say William Knight, just because if he wins, I feel like it's also very, very likely to be a finish. He also is somebody who has really good inside the distance prop. So William Knight is currently pulling up his inside the distance line. Where is he at? I'm pretty sure he is the best inside distance line on the entire card, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, William Knight is why can I not find it on it? By the way, the best site, even though I can't navigate it well right now, Best Fight Odds has all of the has all of the lines up, and it has everything, first round finish, win inside the distance. It's always something that here we go. Yeah. So William Knight is about, depending what book you look, anywhere from -120 to +110 to win inside the distance. That is the best line on the card. So I think for tournament purposes, William Knight would be my answer as the guy who has the most upside, is most likely to finish.
I might, yeah, I can't hate on it because that's just in Knight's nature, and he's extremely aggressive. You do wonder if his coaching staff starts to tell him he needs to start making adjustments in order to last 15 minutes. Obviously, that's something that we don't really know, but we always know that fighters are looking to improve each fight, and if they're not, they're kind of cycled out of the promotion pretty quickly. I will say that Brahima he's very interesting to me because I think he's flying under the radar, has potential to get a finish over Palatnikov. We have seen Palatnikov struggle. And I think that some people, recency bias is a real thing. And a lot of people don't like to commit to somebody who just is coming off of a loss. So I think I'll say contrarian pick. I'll go Brahima.
Yeah. Hey, I dig it. We were talking about the merits of him before. And if he wins, I think it's likely to come via wrestling. I think he's fairly likely to earn a submission. He is good inside the distance odds. So I think if you're looking to go a little more contrarian, a little more risky in tournaments, I have no problem with that. Certainly somebody who, for DraftKings purposes, I'm going to be overweight to in tournaments. Now, there's another fight here that I want to ask you about, and we've gotten kind of a couple questions about in the YouTube in the Slack chat. One from Kilo Whiskey, who asked, is the Saldana Lingo fight a must target in GPP? For me, it's not a must target, but and then we also had Legalized sent in a picture of a lineup and wanted to know our thoughts on it. He has Luis Saldana in it, and every other fighter he has in there. I feel pretty good about being good plays today. But what do you make of that Saldana Lingo fight?
So I think that we could be looking at Saldana. Yes, he walked away with a victory over Jordan Griffin, but if you look at the metrics, he was taken down 4 times, and the significant strike totals were pretty similar. It's 36 significant strikes to Jordan Griffin's 33. He looked great on the Contender Series where he walked away with a finish over Vince Murdoch. scored a knockdown, had the higher output on the feet. But it's not that Lingo's not a bad striker at all. We've just seen Lingo get, somewhat, I would say, outskilled and outgunned against Yusuf Salal, but he was taken down a lot. We saw a better version of Austin Lingo against Jacob Kilburn, had the higher output, 95 significant strikes to 64, scored a takedown. Yes, he was taken down himself, but I like the fact that he went 15 minutes, showed some improvements, showed some gas tank. I'll say that I didn't really like Lingo until I started talking to Jason about it. And I think that I could be blinded by Saldana's potential within a division and ignoring what Austin Lingo's done on the regional scene, being a former champ and having KO ability, also having solid wrestling in his back pocket. I mean, I understand the debut fight for Saldana is not an easy fight, right? Whenever you're going up against Jordan Griffin, not an easy fight at all. But I do think that Lingo, being a part of a strong camp, under 8,000, he might be, in addition to Kelvin Gastelum, might be one of the guys I want a lot of exposure to, possibly catch him with a shot, working some takedowns. I'm surprised to say, but I like Lingo a lot more today than I did on Thursday.
It's a really tough fight for me to know what to do. I'm not prioritizing either of them. Mm-hmm. They're both in my player pool, but this isn't a fight I'm really taking a stand on. If you look at the betting line, it's basically 50-50. There's a slight lean towards Saldana, who's a minus 120 favorite. Inside the distance line, it's basically even odds to finish inside the distance. I am a little concerned about how this fight is going to score if it doesn't end inside the distance. Neither of these guys land at a very high rate. Saldana, so far from what we've seen from him, lands 4.39 significant strikes per minute. On the other side, Austin Lingo, 3.57. Saldana has never landed a takedown when he's been in the octagon. Also, Austin Lingo does not look to grapple typically all that often. So I think that based on the betting line, I have to say, all right, there's somewhat of a chance of a finish. These are two mid-range priced fighters, but it seems like this could score fairly crappy, and just the winner scores like 80 points if it goes to decision. So is this a fight that is high priority for you to target?
That's fair, right? And then it's because you look at the strikes thrown and landed. In the decision against Jacob Kilburn, he landed only 95, and 95 is a lot. If I punch Greg in the face 95 times, that's a lot. But if you look and you see the total strike output, that was a pretty high output fight. He threw 197 strikes. That's a lot. And I do think that, with the skills that Saldana possesses, we could be looking at a back and forth affair where they challenge each other in certain areas. If neither one of them can take each other down, they're going to have no choice but to engage because of Lingo's style. So I feel like this is sneakier than most people might imagine. And, I didn't realize that till I started digging into the total strikes, and then I started seeing, okay, coaching staff adjustments made. You know what? I want Austin Lingo ownership. I want to target him, increase my exposure a little bit today more than I had on Thursday.
Yeah, both of them coming in right around 22% ownership. It does appear to be a little bit upside in the fight. Not one I would target for cash games. Tournaments, I'm going to get a light amount of exposure to both of them. But once again, not a fight that I have a lean on. By the way, if you punch me 95 times in the face, 94 of them are going to be with me unconscious. And then we just have some sort of crime on our hands, right? Because
if I land 95 significant strikes and you're not gone, I need to stop. But
that's when it's time for you to retire.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Just call it quits, man.
This is you can't bet anywhere on Pete how many significant strikes he could land on me, but there is a site where there's all kinds of different prop-based contests, and there are all kinds of strikes. That's over at our sponsor, monkeyknifefight.com. If you guys are new to Monkey Knife Fight, this is a little bit of a different way to play DFS. It's really fun, prop-based contests. There's also over-unders for fantasy point totals, strike totals. It's a really fun, different way to play DFS. If you guys want to go check that out, head on over to Monkey Knife Fight. They also have an app you could download. Use the promo code Awesemo to make your first deposit and get up to a match deposit bonus of up to $100. Now I'm going to ask you. You and I are matched up. We're fighting each other. Monkey Knife Fight line comes up. What is your total strike over-under on Monkey Knife Fight?
That comes back to the same conversation, same point, right? Like if I land, I don't even want to know. I don't even know.
Is Herb Dean the ref? I think that's really what.
Yeah, if Herb Dean's the ref, then what's the total? 75 significant strikes. Goodness gracious! But yeah, if you guys aren't checking out Monkey Knife Fight, I think that you guys are spinning your wheels. I definitely recommend going over there and playing and targeting some of those lines. It's fun, man. Like I think that for me personally, and it's probably because of my involvement in the sport, But watching fights, whether you have money on it from betting or DFS, it's just so exciting because it's such a ridiculous sport. And anything can happen, right? We see come from behind wins all the time. We've seen people break their leg, and we've seen some fights, fizzle out and cancel like right before lock, or get canceled when they're walking out to the cage. But in general, I really think that MMA DFS is some of the most exciting out there.
Yeah, and once again, all the more reason, because if you guys want to see Pete the Heat punch me in the face, then go over to Monkey Knife Fight, use the promo code Awesemo, and take advantage of that deposit bonus. I think though that Pete would show, because I think he's a kind-hearted soul, I think he would take me down and submit me. So the number potentially a little bit higher than but should be maybe a little bit lower than the people in the YouTube chat think. We do have a question here from Maverick726 in our premium Slack chat. He's asking, are we stacking any of the fights tonight? 12 seems a little bit too much, but what are your thoughts with a lot of them with close odds? No chance that I'm going to stack here. The other thing also is, at least for tournament purposes, ever since DraftKings altered their scoring and made it so that the striking is a little bit less higher scoring, we just haven't seen it where we see stacked fights really go off. It was something that, not that we saw it all that often in the past, but there would be those Zhang Weili, Joanna Jędrzejczyk fights where like both sides score like 95 points and stuff like that. That's not something that I really think is going to be the case anymore with the new scoring. So no fights that I would be looking to stack here, but I'll ask you, which is a fight that we have not talked about yet that you think has a chance to be really high volume where where the winner will score very well?
Yeah, it's a great point. And I will say that the fight we're not talking about enough is probably Trevin Jones against Kakhramonov. And yes, Kakhramonov is coming in on short notice. So whenever you have that, you kind of have like a, it's the unknown factor about you, right? Like we do know that Said Yokob has incredible wrestling. He's a phenomenal wrestler, decent striking. He throws some heat on the feet. He really does. But when you struggle to make weight on short notice, you also have to perform the following day. So it's, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, making weight's half the battle, but if you're killing yourself to make weight, now you still have to go up against a guy that had a full camp. And Trevin Jones has looked remarkable in the UFC. And admittedly, I didn't see him pulling off a victory in the UFC. And, he has a no decision technically over Timur Valiev, but he knocked him right out after having to overcome some adversity and getting nearly stopped. But when he touches people on the chin, man, they fall down. And that was, that was shown in his previous fight against Mario Batista as well. Like another guy, I was like, okay, now, Trevin Jones, we're on to you, man. You got lucky in your first fight. Mario Batista is going to go in there and, put it on you and possibly walk away with a finish. Trevin Jones touches him on the chin. He collapses and falls. So a guy in Kakhramonov who has really been finished in the past, being so young in the sport, I think Trevin Jones could be flying on the radar a little bit. And I understand if people don't want to target him because of, the typical skill set that we saw coming into the UFC. But some people really just, start hitting their stride once they get into the best promotion in the world. And I'll say that Trevin Jones has looked like a leveled up fighter ever since.
Yeah, he's had impressive showing so far, and especially that win that he had in his debut over Valiev. That was when we really had to face some adversity and rally back. That was a fight where personally I was pretty high on Valiev in that spot, and that was a fight that looked like it could have been stopped a couple of times in the first round. And then Valiev just kind of tired himself out. But it took a tremendous amount of heart and durability for Trevin Jones to rally back. So he does appear at the very least to be somebody who's pretty hard to finish. I do agree that is a pretty good fight to target. But there's one that's also really standing out to me that I'm curious to hear your thoughts on. And that is the Bahamondes fight against Roosevelt Roberts. And the reason being is just the fight style we've seen from Bahamondes so far, in particular the last fight against Makdessi, where he continued to move forward. And it was a fight where he was very much outmatched on the feet in terms of who was landing the more damaging strikes. Makdessi was really putting it on him, but Bahamondes was so tough. He continued to move forward and through just with so much output. So we've seen from him now in that fight, even in a loss, he landed 112 significant strikes. Then his fight on the Contender Series, a fight that he won by second round finish, he had landed 66 significant strikes by the time the fight was stopped. So Roosevelt Roberts is traditionally not a very high output fighter, but just given that we've seen how Bahamondes fights, the amount that he's willing to take damage, to give damage, the kind of output we've seen from him, I think this is a fight where the winner should score very well. Is that something you agree with?
It's interesting, right? Because you have such tall frame fighters for the division. I mean, you have 6'2" Roosevelt Roberts against 6'3" Bahamondes. That's like ridiculous. Both these guys are pretty rangy, pretty long. I will say that Bahamondes' volume is a lot better than Roosevelt Roberts. Roosevelt Roberts is really going to have to increase that if he wants to compete on the feet. But the X factor here is Roberts. He's the more well-rounded, MMA fighter, in my opinion. He has a submission game. He has decent takedowns, but he needs to initiate them or clinch up with Bahamondes if he really wants to stifle the offense and, possibly steal some rounds. I'm a little interested. I feel like these guys might negate each other a little bit, Greg, right? They're both tall. Typically, when you have fighters going up against tall fighters, they're difficult to take down because of their hips. In addition to that, they're long limbs. They're able to spread their legs out a little bit, prevent the takedown. So I feel like this could be a lot of against the clinch if it's in open space. I really do favor Bahamondes. We did see Roosevelt Roberts get wobbled with a shot from Kevin Kroom. He's been good on the regional scene, but he's alternated wins and losses throughout his career. Came in, was aggressive, caught Roosevelt Roberts, and capitalized with a choke. So I do like Roosevelt Roberts, but this is a fight for me, right? Typically, I thought I'd have more exposure to. I'm a little underweight. I don't know. I just have a weird feeling about this fight. Obviously, they're priced accordingly. It's not like they're priced high, so they have to do less in order to pay off their salaries. But I just think stylistically, I will side with Roosevelt Roberts at 8,400.
Yeah, I'm a little bit overweight to both sides of this fight.
Okay.
We've got Roosevelt Roberts. Once again, I think there's grappling upside from him. Something else that we've not really seen from Bahamondes. We haven't really seen him have to defend takedowns that much in the octagon. And, that's always a red flag for me where it's, if I haven't seen somebody wrestle or grapple, I kind of default to thinking the reason we haven't seen them do it is because they're not that good at it. Yep. So I have a feeling we could see Bahamondes put on his back in this fight. But if he is able to keep the standing, I think there's a pretty good chance he out volumes in Roosevelt Roberts and maybe finishes him on the feet, just because the kind of volume we've seen from Bahamondes combined with having seen Roberts get hurt recently in a fight. 7,800 Bahamondes is only projected for 14% ownership right now. To me, I think he's a high upside fighter that's going overlooked in that lower price range. So 14% is a number that I want to be overweight to. I don't know exactly what to make of this fight, but people are generally not targeting it. And it's another one of these fights where if you look at the betting odds here, close to a pick'em fight and 50-50 to finish inside the distance. A slight lean towards Roberts on the betting line. He's about minus 145 to minus 155, depending what book you look at. But one that I have to assume is a little bit of upside just based on those odds to finish inside the distance. So,
yeah, I would agree. And I think that whatever you said, 14% for Bahamondes is criminally low. I don't expect him to win this fight, but if he does, I think that he has some high upside there. I think Roosevelt Roberts is the play. But Greg, we got 400 people checking us out today, answering their questions, helping us out. If you guys would just hit that like button, get us over 120, we really appreciate you. A couple more minutes of this show. Shoot your questions into chat, please.
Yeah, and if we get to, I'm going to come with a very scientific number here, 168 likes on the show, and you guys could see Pete hit me with a body shot, and so that's gonna be the number right here, guys. 168. And here's what the people don't know. This is just between us, Pete. I'm looking at I'm looking at you on my screen right now, so people don't say I'm looking away. We live very far apart. It's never going to happen, but but just keep that between us. But all right, guys, like the video, you get to see Pete land a body shot on me, and we'll get to see me crumble. Cause I think there's a lot of people who just want to see me get injured. And that's a good way to do it, is you like our videos. And also you want to be subscribed to the YouTube channel anyway, because we've got MMA content, we've got MLB, and there's a lot of football content coming up. So you guys want to come check out our channel because of all the NFL stuff that's coming down the pipe. Also, if you're looking to play NFL DFS, now is the time to sign up at Awesemo.com because we're running a promo code to get you 25% off our NFL annual pass. If you're going to be playing NFL DFS, if you're going to be subscribing to Awesemo, you might as well do it now. Take advantage of the 25% off. Use the promo code BLITZ, BLITZ, and that will get you 25% off the NFL annual package. It's an early bird special, so it's not going to be around for long. So go check out our NFL content using the promo code BLITZ. All right, just a few minutes left here. As Pete said, if anybody has questions, fire them into the chat so we can make sure that we get to all of your questions. And one that we have here from our guy, Kilo Whiskey, in our premium Slack chat, is asking, who is our favorite leverage play of the slate. So, Pete, for you, who is your favorite leverage option?
I'm saying Fabio Charant, and I know it's not going to be a popular one, hence why it's leverage. And I think that the pricing is just off on the fight. Like I know these guys from the regional scene. I think the fight should be priced closer than it is. I get that William Knight's the favorite, but I think Fabio Charant's a pretty good leverage play.
All right, I'm going to pull up the most recent ownership odds just to see where we're at in terms of highest owned fighters. By default, my answer is Kelvin Gastelum, just because Cannonier is projected to be the most rostered fighter on the entire card. Kelvin Gastelum still is projected for over 30% ownership, so he's going to be popular. But Cannonier being rostered nearly 50% of the field's lineups and as the most popular fighter on the card, based on my ownership, the answer is Kelvin Gastelum. But I don't know if that's a spicy enough answer for people, because I think a lot of people are going to be rostering Gastelum. But that would be the one that I would consider to be the correct answer based on my ownership. Let's see. If I was to go...
I can't believe Cannonier is that popular, Greg.
Yeah, right now we have in our most recent ownership projections, it's projected to be the most popular fighter on the card. So that's where we're at. By the way, also, guys, if you guys want to check out some last minute free content, we still have, about an hour and 10 minutes until the slate locks. The MMA fighter rankings, those are free over at awesemo.com. But, it's funny. There's a couple of guys that I like here that are not picking up any ownership. I mentioned Bahamundez before. I don't know if I'd categorize him as a leverage play, because it's not like Roosevelt Roberts is super popular or anything. But Bahamundez at his ownership, somebody I'm going to be overweight to. The other one too, Parker Porter. He's expected to be the second lowest rostered fighter on the entire card. Chase Sherman's expected to be one of the most popular fighters. So that's going to be my other option is Parker Porter, just based that Chase Sherman, not great head movement. We've seen him take a lot of damage in the past. And once again, it's a high variance heavyweight fight. Neither one of these guys have great distance, have great defense. I think it's going to be kind of a rock'em sock'em robots type fight in the middle of the octagon. Somebody's head is going to pop off. I think it's pretty close to a 50-50 fight. So given the ownership, Parker Porter, those are going to be my two, Parker Porter and Kelvin Gastelum.
Yeah, my two leverage plays will be Charant and Porter. Obviously, the risk if you're asking a leverage question, but I do think that Charant and Porter will make my list.
Yeah, they're definitely guys who I'm going to be overweight to. We do have a less serious question from Water Droplets. Greg, how much money on the contract to fight Pete?
Fight?
So if anybody has $20 in their pocket, I could be had for cheap. I've done much worse things under a bridge to pay rent before. So listen, it doesn't cost much to pay me off.
Damn, fight? They want you to full on fight? Ah, man.
I'm fast. I could run away for a while. I mean, there's a clock.
In a cage, though? In a cage?
Can I climb on the cage? I don't know. I've never seen anybody do that before.
Like
Can I just run? Do like the Anthony Pettis thing, except there's no actual kick to run. I just keep running on the wall.
You're going to hit me with the Showtime kick? Oh, goodness.
All right, couple minutes left. So let me check to see if we have any final questions in the Slack chat. We have somebody here who added us who asked a question about their lineup. So I guess this is what we could close with. We've talked about all the fighters in Asobi's lineup here. The only one that we haven't really mentioned here is he has a Bay Malecki here, the Malecki-Nunes fight. This is one we very briefly talked about before the show started. And one thing that's pretty surprising me about this fight, both fighters are going to be pretty low owned based on our projections. It has about 50-50 chance to finish inside the distance. So Bay Malecki, not a high priority for me, but I don't mind getting her into my player pool just based on the inside the distance odds.
Yeah, it's an interesting fight, right? Because Josiah Nunes is like a little firecracker. She stands 5'2", has a 67-inch reach, whereas Bay Malecki's 5'9" with a 74-inch reach. So 7-inch height and reach advantage for Bay Malecki. If she fights the right fight, Josiah Nunes probably shouldn't even touch her with many combinations. They both have extensive kickboxing backgrounds. Bay Malecki comes from the stronger overall MMA camp. We have seen her submit opponents in the past, but she does somewhat look like a fish out of water in that department. I'm guessing that she's made advancements in that area, but I think that Bay Malecki should walk away victorious given her physical advantages of the fight. But for me, just because they're so skilled in the striking department, they might negate each other a little bit, whereas Bay Malecki just walks away with a decision.
All right, guys, unfortunately, Pete and I are out of time. I was happy I got to warm the seat for Jason a little bit, but don't worry. I know some people were probably a little disappointed not to see Jason Floyd. I'm sure that he'll be back for the next fight card. Although I don't know exactly what his football schedule is because we do have football season starting up. But for now, Pete, thank you for doing the show with me. That was a lot of fun. Everybody tuned in, thank you very much. Hit the like button on the way out, but don't go anywhere because we have NFL Live Before Lock coming up next on the YouTube channel.